Alice Winters stood by the window of her elegant London townhouse, staring out at the soft drizzle that blanketed the city. It was a scene she'd once found comforting, but today, the raindrops only mirrored the turbulence inside her. Her fingers absently toyed with the hem of her tailored blazer, her mind still reeling from the discovery. Just a week ago, her life had seemed impeccable. At 38, she was at the height of her career as a partner in a prestigious law firm, with a reputation for her sharp intellect and tenacity in the courtroom. Clients and colleagues admired her, and she wore her success like a shield against any cracks in her personal life. Until that shield shattered. It had been a mundane Saturday afternoon when she stumbled upon the truth. Jason, her husband of over 10 years, had left his phone unattended on the kitchen counter. Alice hadn't intended to snoop. She'd trusted him completely. But a name she didn't recognize flashed on the screen: Sophie. The message was innocent enough at first glance, but something about the tone unsettled her. Her gut twisted as she scrolled through more messages. The words, "I miss you" and "last night was incredible" leapt off the screen, plunging Alice into an icy wave of disbelief. Her breath caught and her hand trembled, but she forced herself to keep reading. 6 months. Her husband had been seeing someone else, a younger colleague at his firm, behind her back for half a year. The betrayal was a searing knife, sharp and unforgiving. Her perfect life, the marriage she'd poured her heart into, was built on a lie. Jason's absence lately, the late nights at work, the unexplained business trips, they all suddenly made sense. "How could I have been so blind?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the soft patter of the rain. She hadn't confronted Jason yet. The cowardice of her own indecision gnawed at her. What could she say? Why? The question haunted her. Why would he betray her after everything they had built together? But the answer eluded her, and perhaps that was what terrified her the most. Alice turned from the window and paced the length of the room. Her heart ached, yet anger simmered beneath the surface. She had spent years climbing the ranks of a male-dominated field, proving her worth at every turn. She thought she'd found in Jason a partner who respected and loved her, but now it seemed like all the stability she'd worked so hard to achieve was an illusion. That evening she sat at the dinner table opposite Jason, the tension between them almost palpable. His eyes flicked up from his plate, and for a moment Alice wondered if he could sense that she knew. But no, Jason remained oblivious, chatting casually about his day. She listened, nodding mechanically, her mind racing with the weight of her decision. In the days that followed, Alice began methodically preparing for the inevitable. She made inquiries with a divorce lawyer, set up meetings, and carefully started dividing their financial assets in her mind. Work became her refuge. The courtroom, with its clear rules and structured arguments, felt like the only place where things still made sense. She threw herself into her cases with renewed vigor, hoping the sharpness of her professional focus would dull the edges of her personal pain. One morning, after another restless night, Alice found herself in the office long before anyone else. The silence was a welcome relief from the chaos that had invaded her mind. As she reviewed case files, her phone buzzed. A text from Jason appeared. "Can we talk tonight? I think we need to." She stared at the screen, her heart thudding. He knew. The time for pretense was over. That evening, Alice walked into their shared home with a newfound resolve. Jason was waiting for her, standing by the fireplace with a guilty expression that confirmed everything she already knew. His words stumbled out in a poorly constructed apology. He didn't deny the affair with Sophie, didn't try to make excuses, but nothing he said could lessen the sting. "I never wanted to hurt you, Alice," he mumbled, eyes downcast. "But you did," Alice replied, her voice calm yet laced with steel. "And now, there's no going back." Her decision was made. Divorce was the only way forward. She wouldn't cling to a broken marriage, no matter how much history they shared. She had built her life once. She could rebuild it again. As the days passed, Alice filed for divorce, her professional life becoming her primary focus. She took on more cases than ever, her name circulating in legal circles as a force to be reckoned with. But no matter how much she buried herself in work, the loneliness remained. Jason was gone, their home now hollow, and the future she'd envisioned lay in ruins. Yet beneath the heartache there was a spark, a quiet voice urging her forward. This wasn't the end of her story. She had faced challenges before, and she would face this one too. What Alice didn't realize was that the biggest challenge wasn't over. The past had a way of returning at the most unexpected moments, and soon her path would cross with someone who would force her to question everything again. But for now, Alice was a woman rebuilding her world, one case, one decision, one day at a time. 3 months had passed since the divorce papers were signed, and Alice Winters was now a woman with a fierce sense of determination. The breakup had left its scars, but Alice had found solace in her work, rising even further in the ranks at the law firm. She had handled high-profile cases with ease, earning herself more respect and recognition. Yet, despite her growing success, the silence of her home still lingered, a constant reminder of what had been lost. One Friday evening, Alice stood in front of the mirror in her office bathroom, touching up her makeup. Tonight was the annual business gala, one of the most important events of the year, where London's top lawyers, business leaders, and politicians mingled. Alice had been attending these events for years, and she knew how to command a room. Tonight, she wore a sleek black gown, its understated elegance mirroring the woman she had become, polished, in control, and unflinchingly composed. The event was held at the Savoy, its grand ballroom shimmering with chandeliers and the murmur of polite conversation. Alice arrived alone, as she had since the divorce, slipping effortlessly into the crowd. She greeted colleagues and clients, engaging in discussions about legal matters and upcoming deals, her professional persona firmly in place. But beneath the surface, the loneliness was harder to mask. This world, once so familiar, now felt foreign without Jason by her side. Midway through the evening, as Alice sipped a glass of champagne, she noticed a figure in the distance, someone she hadn't seen in over a decade. The recognition came instantly, even before he turned fully towards her. Harry Hayes. Her heart skipped a beat, memories flooding back before she could stop them. They had been inseparable once, back in their university days. Harry, with his quick wit and easy smile, had been the first man to make her believe in love. But after graduation, he'd left for America to pursue his business degree, and their lives had drifted apart. She had never expected to see him again. Alice watched as Harry navigated the room, his broad shoulders and confident gait cutting through the crowd. He looked much the same, tall, handsome, with that same unshakable energy. But now there was an air of quiet authority about him, the mark of a man who had succeeded. As if sensing her gaze, Harry turned, his eyes meeting hers across the room. For a moment they both froze, the years collapsing between them. He smiled, that familiar heart-stopping smile, and before Alice could gather her thoughts, he was walking towards her. "Alice Winters," he said, his voice warm with recognition. "I never thought I'd see you here." "Harry," Alice replied, her voice steady but her pulse racing. "It's been a long time." "Too long," he said, taking a step closer. "You look, well, even better than I remember." Alice felt a blush rise to her cheeks, something she hadn't experienced in years. "You haven't changed much either," she said, though it was a lie. He had changed. There was something more grounded, more mature about him now. They exchanged pleasantries, catching up on the basics. Harry had built a successful business abroad and had recently returned to London to expand his ventures. Alice shared a bit about her career, her guarded words leaving out the more personal aspects of her recent life. They spoke easily, as if no time had passed, though there was an undeniable undercurrent of tension, a sense that both of them were remembering what they once had. As the evening wore on, Alice found herself drawn to Harry in a way she hadn't expected. He was the same man who had once made her laugh, who had understood her in ways no one else had. For the first time since her marriage ended, Alice felt a flicker of something she had buried, hope, perhaps, or the possibility of feeling again. "I don't suppose you'd want to grab a coffee sometime," Harry asked as the event began to wind down. "It would be great to catch up properly." Alice hesitated. She hadn't let anyone in since the divorce, had vowed to focus solely on her career. But Harry wasn't just anyone. "I think I'd like that," she said, surprising herself. They exchanged numbers, and as Harry left the gala, Alice couldn't help but feel the stirrings of excitement. Life, it seemed, was offering her a second chance. Mom. The next week, Alice and Harry met for coffee in a small cafe near her office. The conversation flowed easily, and Alice found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. They reminisced about their university days, laughed about old professors and study sessions that had turned into late-night debates about everything from politics to philosophy. "I remember those debates," Harry said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes twinkling. "You always won. Still the smartest person in the room, I bet." Alice smiled, shaking her head. "I had my moments, but you held your own too, especially when it came to anything involving business." "Well, that's my job now," Harry replied. "Speaking of which, I'm actually working on a big deal right now. It's part of why I'm back in London." Alice raised an eyebrow. "A deal? That sounds intriguing." "It's complicated," Harry said, his tone suddenly more serious. "Business always is." For a brief moment, something in his eyes shifted, a flicker of hesitation that Alice couldn't quite place. She dismissed it quickly. After all, they were still catching up. It wasn't unusual for him to be guarded about business matters. She, too, had secrets she wasn't ready to share. As the weeks passed, Alice and Harry continued to meet. Coffee turned into dinners, and dinners into long conversations about life, dreams, and what they had both been through in the years apart. Alice found herself growing more comfortable with him, allowing herself to believe in the possibility of something more. It felt good to reconnect, to feel wanted again. One night, as they sat together in a quiet corner of a restaurant, Harry reached across the table and took her hand. "Alice, I've missed you, more than I can say. I know things have changed, but I want to try again. What we had back then was special, and I think it still could be." Alice's heart swelled. The old feelings were still there, undeniable. But before she could reply, something gnawed at the back of her mind, the flicker of hesitation she'd seen in Harry before. She pushed it aside. Surely it was nothing. "I've missed you too," she said softly, her walls lowering just enough to let him in. But as Harry smiled, something deep within Alice stirred. She wanted to trust him, but after Jason's betrayal, she knew better than to let her guard down completely, and she would soon realize that her instincts weren't wrong, because beneath Harry's charm and sincerity lay a truth that would soon come crashing into her carefully rebuilt life. Alice was not one to ignore her instincts. The warmth she felt with Harry, the ease of their conversations, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, it was all real, undeniable. Yet something nagged at the back of her mind, a subtle whisper of doubt that grew louder as the days passed. Their relationship had rekindled quickly, too quickly perhaps. Alice found herself swept up in the rush of old feelings and new possibilities. They saw each other frequently. Dinners, long walks through Hyde Park, quiet evenings at her townhouse. It was as if no time had passed since their university days, yet both of them had been shaped by the lives they had lived apart. Still, there was something Harry wasn't saying. One evening they met for drinks at a rooftop bar overlooking the glittering London skyline. The air was crisp and the conversation was light, but as Alice sipped her wine, she decided it was time to address the growing tension she couldn't quite shake. "So, tell me more about this business deal you're working on," she said, her voice casual but her eyes locked on his. Harry's expression flickered just for a moment before he smiled and leaned back in his chair. "It's nothing exciting, really. Just the usual corporate stuff, contracts, negotiations. You know how it is." Alice tilted her head, studying him. "You've mentioned it a few times, but never in detail. Is everything going smoothly?" "Yeah, of course," Harry replied, though his gaze briefly darted to the side before meeting hers again. "It's just, well, complicated, as most business deals are. I don't want to bore you with it." "You won't bore me," Alice said, her tone soft but firm. "I'm a lawyer, remember. I deal with contracts and negotiations all the time. Maybe I can help." For a moment, Harry's charming facade cracked. He hesitated, then laughed lightly. "You're relentless, just like you were back at university." "Relentless, yes, but also concerned," Alice pressed. "Is something going on, Harry? You seem distracted." Harry sighed, running a hand through his hair, and for the first time he seemed uneasy. "It's just business, Alice. I don't want to drag you into it." A cold wave of uncertainty swept through her. He wasn't telling her the whole truth, that much was clear. But why? She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that their reunion was something real, something worth fighting for. Yet Jason's betrayal was still fresh in her mind, and she couldn't afford another heartbreak. "Harry," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "you know I've been through a lot recently. I need honesty. I can handle complicated, but I can't handle being kept in the dark." He looked at her, his eyes filled with something close to regret. "I know, Alice. I promise I'm not hiding anything important. It's just business politics. It's messy, and I don't want to involve you in it. Trust me. Trust me." The words hung between them like a fragile thread. Alice nodded, but inside, the thread was already fraying. She had given her trust before, and it had been shattered. Could she really risk it again? The following week, Alice was in her office when she received an unexpected visit from one of her firm's senior partners, Mark Davies. He was a sharp, no-nonsense type who rarely stopped by her office without a reason. "Alice, do you have a minute?" Mark asked, his tone unusually serious. "Of course," Alice replied, motioning for him to sit down. "What's on your mind?" Mark sat down, his expression unreadable. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you. I didn't want to bring it up earlier, but it's becoming relevant." Alice's curiosity piqued. "What is it?" "It's about the Pearson case," Mark said, referring to one of the firm's largest clients who was embroiled in a high-stakes corporate lawsuit against a rival firm. Alice had been heavily involved in preparing for the case. "Go on," she urged. Mark leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I've been hearing some troubling rumors. Apparently, the rival firm, Landon and Reed, has been gaining some inside information on our strategies. Nothing concrete yet, but there's suspicion that someone close to us might be leaking details." Alice frowned. "That's impossible. We've been airtight with this case. No one outside the team knows our approach." "I thought the same," Mark said grimly. "But here's where it gets interesting. I did some digging, and it turns out that Landon and Reed has recently brought in a new consultant to assist with their business dealings, someone who knows you well." Alice's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" "Harry Hayes." The name hit her like a punch to the gut. For a moment, Alice couldn't breathe. She stared at Mark, her mind racing to catch up with what he had just said. Harry, working with her biggest competitor, the very firm trying to undermine one of the most critical cases of her career. Mark continued, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but if Hayes is involved, we need to be cautious. If you have any information that could help us understand his role, now would be the time to share it. Alice swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. I didn't know he was working with Landon and Reed. Mark raised an eyebrow. You're sure? I'm sure, she replied, though her thoughts were spinning in 1,000 directions. Mark stood up, placing a hand on her desk. I trust you, Alice, but be careful. If there's anything more going on, you need to let me know. After Mark left, Alice sank back into her chair, her mind reeling. Harry hadn't mentioned anything about working with Landon and Reed. Why hadn't he told her? She had asked him repeatedly about his business dealings, and he had brushed her off, assuring her there was nothing to worry about. But this changed everything. She thought back to the flicker of hesitation in his eyes, the vague answers, the unease he'd shown whenever the topic of his work had come up. Was he using her? Was he playing both sides, feeding information to her rival firm while pretending to rekindle their relationship? Her chest tightened with anger and disbelief. It couldn't be true. Harry wasn't like that, was he? Alice knew she needed answers, and she needed them fast. She couldn't let her personal life sabotage her career. Not again. That evening, Alice confronted Harry. They met at his flat, a modern space that felt almost sterile in its simplicity. Harry greeted her with a warm smile, but Alice barely responded. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice edged with tension. Of course, Harry said, his smile fading as he sensed the seriousness in her tone. What's wrong? Alice didn't waste time. I found out you're working with Landon and Reed. Harry's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, he said nothing. You didn't tell me, Alice pressed. Why? Alice, it's not what you think, Harry began, running a hand through his hair. Yes, I've been consulting with them, but it has nothing to do with your case. How can I believe that? Alice snapped, her voice rising. You know I'm working on the Pearson case. You know how critical it is to my firm. How am I supposed to believe you're not using me? Alice, please, Harry said, stepping closer, his expression earnest. I swear, I didn't even know you were involved in that case when I took the job. I'm not here to betray you. Alice looked at him, her heart torn between the man she remembered and the man standing in front of her now. She wanted to believe him, desperately. But after everything that had happened with Jason, how could she? I can't do this again, Harry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't go through another betrayal. Harry's face softened, his hand reaching out to hers. Alice, I would never hurt you. I've made mistakes in the past, but this isn't one of them. I care about you, more than you know. Alice wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel safe again, to trust. But the shadow of doubt loomed large, threatening to tear down the fragile connection they had rebuilt. Then prove it, Alice said quietly, pulling her hand away, because right now, I'm not sure I can trust you. The truth, she knew, would soon come to light, whether she was ready for it or not. Alice barely slept that night. Her mind was a tangle of conflicting emotions, distrust, confusion, and a lingering desire to believe in Harry's sincerity. She had spent years learning how to read people, how to find the cracks in their stories. But when it came to Harry, those instincts were clouded by the deep history they shared. By morning, she was no closer to an answer. At the firm, Alice worked in silence, her usual razor-sharp focus splintered by thoughts of Harry. The Pearson case was heating up, and every piece of evidence was critical. The firm's rival, Landon and Reed, had been ruthless in their legal strategy, constantly one step ahead, as if they knew exactly what was coming. As she reviewed documents, her phone buzzed. A message from Harry. Can we talk tonight? Please. Alice stared at the message for a long moment before responding. 7 p.m. My place. She needed to hear his explanation, but more than that, she needed to see if he could look her in the eye and tell her the truth. That evening, Harry arrived at her townhouse, looking more serious than she had ever seen him. Gone was the easy charm, replaced by a quiet intensity. Alice stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, heart pounding in her chest. "Come in," she said, her voice cold. She stepped aside, allowing him into the living room. They faced each other, the tension between them palpable. Harry didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Alice, I know you don't trust me right now, but I swear I've never done anything to hurt you or sabotage your career." Alice's jaw tightened. "Then why didn't you tell me you were working with Landon and Reed? How could you keep that from me?" Harry ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his posture. "Because I knew how it would look. I knew you'd think I was part of some scheme to undermine you, but that's not the case. I'm consulting on an entirely different matter, a business acquisition. I'm not involved with the Pearson case at all." Alice narrowed her eyes. "And I'm supposed to just believe that? After everything I've been through, Harry, trust isn't something I give lightly anymore. You know that." He sighed, stepping closer, his eyes searching hers. "I understand. I do. But I need you to know that I'm telling the truth. I care about you, Alice. I didn't come back into your life to use you. I came back because I couldn't stay away." His words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. Alice wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this connection, the one she had felt so deeply, was real. But the doubt gnawed at her, refusing to let go. "Then explain something to me," she said, her voice steady. "Why has Landon and Reed been one step ahead of us in this case? It's like they know everything we're planning." Harry looked genuinely surprised. "What? I don't know anything about that, Alice. I swear. If someone's leaking information, it's not me." Alice studied him, searching his face for any hint of deception. But his eyes, those same eyes that had once made her believe in love, held nothing but sincerity. "I want to believe you," she said quietly, her voice softening. "But if I find out you're lying to me, Harry, I won't forgive you. I can't go through that again." Harry nodded, a shadow of pain crossing his face. "You won't, I promise." The next morning, Alice arrived at the firm determined to uncover the truth. She pulled together her team, asking them to go over every detail of the Pearson case, from their strategy meetings to the most recent drafts of legal arguments. Somewhere, somehow, the leak had to be found. Hours later, her associate, Sarah, knocked on her office door. "I think I've found something," Sarah said, her voice tense. Alice's stomach knotted. "What is it?" Sarah handed her a file. "I cross-checked the list of people who had access to our Pearson documents. There's an email trail that looks suspicious. It's from Henry Bryce, one of our junior partners." Alice's brow furrowed. "Henry? What about him?" Sarah leaned in, her voice low. "He's been forwarding files to an external account. At first, I thought it was just internal sharing, but when I looked closely, the account is linked to someone at Landon and Reed." Alice's heart sank. "Are you sure?" "Yes, it's all here. He's been passing them information for weeks." Anger flared in Alice's chest. She had been looking in the wrong direction, doubting Harry while the real betrayal had been happening under her nose. Henry Bryce, someone she had mentored, someone she had trusted, had been the one undermining their case. "I'll handle this," Alice said, her voice hard. "But Sarah, keep this quiet for now. We can't let anyone at Landon and Reed know we're onto them." Sarah nodded and left the room, leaving Alice to sit with the weight of the revelation. She had doubted Harry, suspected him of treachery, but he had been telling the truth. The guilt was a bitter pill to swallow. That evening, Alice called Harry. "I need to see you," she said. "I owe you an apology." They met at a quiet bar. a place they had frequented during their university days. Harry was already seated when she arrived, his expression serious but hopeful. Alice sat down across from him, the words heavy on her tongue. "Harry, I was wrong. You weren't the one leaking information. It was someone from my firm, Henry Bryce. I found out today." Harry's face relaxed, relief washing over him. "I told you, Alice. I'd never do anything to hurt you." "I know," Alice whispered, the weight of her mistrust pressing on her. "I let my past cloud my judgment. I should have trusted you." Harry reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "It's okay. I understand why you had doubts. After what you went through with Jason, I get it." Alice looked into his eyes, feeling a rush of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "I just didn't want to make the same mistake again. I was so scared that you were lying to me." Harry squeezed her hand gently. "I would never lie to you, Alice. What we have, it's real. I know we have a lot of history, but I want to build something new with you, something honest." For the first time since their reunion, Alice felt her defenses crumble. She had been fighting so hard to protect herself, to keep from being hurt again. But maybe, just maybe, Harry was different. He wasn't Jason. He had never been. "I want that too," she admitted softly. "But you have to understand, it's going to take time for me to trust again." Harry smiled, his eyes warm with understanding. "I'll wait, however long it takes." For the first time in months, Alice felt a sense of peace. The storm that had raged inside her was finally beginning to calm. Harry had proven himself, and though the future was still uncertain, she felt ready to face it, with him. But deep down, she knew the hardest decision was yet to come. Her career and reputation were on the line, and though Henry's betrayal had been uncovered, the fight with Landon and Reed was far from over. And as much as she wanted to embrace this second chance with Harry, she couldn't shake the fear that the demands of her professional life might once again stand in the way of her happiness. For now, though, she would hold on to the hope that love and trust could be rebuilt, one step at a time. Alice stood before the towering courthouse, the crisp autumn air whipping through her hair. The Pearson case was in its final stages, and today was the day that would determine not only her firm's success, but also the integrity of her career. She had spent weeks meticulously preparing every argument, every piece of evidence, and despite the tension, she felt ready. It had been 2 weeks since she uncovered Henry Bryce's betrayal. His confession had been swift once confronted with the evidence, and Alice wasted no time severing his ties with the firm. Landon and Reed's underhanded tactics had come to light, but that didn't mean they were backing down. The fight was still fierce, and today, Alice would need to be at her best. As she walked through the courthouse doors, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Harry. "I know today's important. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you. Good luck." A warmth spread through Alice at his words. Their relationship had shifted in the weeks following her discovery. The mistrust had faded, replaced by a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been lost so long ago. Harry had been patient, understanding of her cautious heart, and slowly, Alice had allowed herself to believe that this time, things could be different. But as much as she cared for him, today was about her career, and Alice wasn't about to let anything distract her from that. The courtroom was packed. Alice stood tall at the plaintiff's table, her notes neatly arranged in front of her, her gaze steely as she surveyed the opposing counsel. Landon and Reed had spared no expense in their defense, bringing in one of their top partners to handle the case. It didn't matter. Alice had faced tougher opponents before and won. The trial began, and Alice's voice was clear and commanding as she presented her case. Piece by piece, she dismantled Landon and Reed's arguments, using the very information they had tried to steal against them. Every point landed with precision, every question to the witnesses designed to build an ironclad narrative. As the hours passed, Alice felt the weight of the courtroom's attention shift. She could see it in the judge's eyes, in the subtle shift of the jury's posture. They were listening, and they were on her side. When it was time for the defense's closing arguments, the opposing lawyer looked rattled, his earlier confidence shaken. Alice watched him closely, her heart beating steadily as he tried, unsuccessfully, to undermine the case she had so carefully constructed. Finally, it was her turn for closing arguments. Alice stood, smoothing her suit jacket as she made her way to the center of the courtroom. Her heart swelled with a mix of anticipation and pride. She knew the truth was on her side, but more than that, she had earned her place here, through hard work, resilience, and the ability to keep going, even when life had tried to knock her down. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Alice began, her voice strong, "this case is not just about contracts or business dealings. It's about integrity. It's about the truth. What my client seeks is justice, plain and simple. Landon and Reed has done everything in their power to obscure that truth, to twist the facts to serve their interests. But today, you have the power to hold them accountable." She paused, her eyes scanning the jury, making sure each word hit its mark. "In this courtroom, we are bound by the law, but we are also bound by something deeper, by a commitment to fairness, to doing what's right. And I trust that today you will see through the lies, the deception, and deliver a verdict that restores that balance." Alice returned to her seat, her heart pounding. The case was out of her hands now, but she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had given it everything. Hours later, the jury returned. "Have you reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, standing. "We find in favor of the plaintiff." The words hit Alice like a wave of relief. She had done it. They had won. There was a murmur of approval from her colleagues behind her, and Alice allowed herself a small, victorious smile. The fight had been long, but justice had been served. As the courtroom emptied, Alice gathered her things, preparing to leave. Her phone buzzed again. It was Harry. "How did it go?" Alice smiled as she typed back. "We won." "Of course you did. Dinner tonight to celebrate?" She hesitated for a moment before responding. "I'll meet you at the usual place at 8. Later that evening, Alice walked into the familiar restaurant where she and Harry had been meeting for the past few months. He was already there, sitting at their usual table, a bottle of champagne chilling on ice. When he saw her, his face broke into a wide grin. "There she is, the woman of the hour." Alice couldn't help but smile as she slid into the seat opposite him. "You make it sound like I did something extraordinary." "You did," Harry said earnestly. "You've been through hell and back, Alice. Today was a reminder of just how incredible you are. You don't just survive, you win." His words touched something deep inside her. For so long, Alice had been fighting, first to prove herself in her career, then to pick up the pieces after Jason's betrayal. And now, she was finally seeing the light on the other side. They toasted to her victory, and as the evening wore on, their conversation grew more personal. Harry reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "I know I said I'd wait as long as it takes," he began, his voice soft, "but I need you to know something. I'm here, Alice, and I'm all in. I don't want to rush you, but I don't want to pretend either. I want us to have a future, together." Alice looked down at their hands, her heart both heavy and light at the same time. She had been so afraid to let someone in again, afraid of the pain that love could bring. But Harry wasn't Jason. He had stood by her, even when she had doubted him. And now, for the first time in years, she felt like she could let go of the fear. "I want that too," Alice said quietly, lifting her gaze to meet his. "But I need you to know something. I won't sacrifice who I am or what I've built for anyone. My career, my independence, they mean everything to me." Harry smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "I wouldn't want you to. That's why I fell in love with you, Alice. You're unstoppable. I'm just lucky to be part of your life." The words hung between them, powerful and undeniable. Alice felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something full of possibility. As they left the restaurant, walking hand in hand down the quiet London street, Alice realized something. Her life had changed in ways she could never have imagined over the past year. She had lost love, rebuilt herself, and found it again in a way she hadn't expected. But through it all, she had remained true to herself, and that, she knew, was the real victory. Whatever challenges lay ahead, both in love and in her career, she was ready for them. For the first time, Alice felt truly free, free to love, free to succeed, and most importantly, free to be herself. And she was ready to embrace every twist and turn that life still had in store.